This episode of Greenhouse Grower to Grower is sponsored by Bartlett Instrument Company. Bartlett's Head Grower app allows growers to remotely control, monitor, and analyze their facilities from anywhere. You can adjust your settings, get notifications, and receive reports to your email using the platform. The Head Grower app is compatible with Bartlett's Climate Boss, Time Boss, and Weather Boss controllers. Go to bartinst.com to learn more.
Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. Aren Phillips is a greenhouse systems manager at Walters Gardens in Zeeland, Michigan. He is a team leader on several projects at Walters Gardens, including sales forecasting, automation, data collection and analytics, and the potential of artificial intelligence. Aren was part of a panel discussion at Cultivate 24 on smart technology adoption, and he will also be presenting at the Great Lakes Expo in December on live labor tracking, streamlining ERP systems implementation, and more. I recently caught up with Aren to talk about these topics and why he's taken a strong interest in greenhouse technology. Here's our conversation.
I've always been interested in kind of like the new and upcoming thing, right? So I kind of have a personal goal for myself, and I've been in the industry for about 12 years, and I started my career at Spring Meadow, and now I'm at Walters Gardens, both proven winners partners, and it was really I kind of set this personal goal for myself early on that I wanted to learn something big and new every year. So each season I wanted to take on something new, something challenging. And I've continued that and really starting to get into some of these technological innovations and how they can make either my job easier or the jobs of my coworkers easier. I've always kind of been like an ideas guy, where it's like I'm looking at a process and I'm thinking, man, why are we doing that? Like, I love to ask, why are we doing this? Like, what's the reasoning behind this? Is it something that we've always done this way, or is it something that we really need to look at this in a different light? And just, I would say naturally, the role of technology fits into that pretty well. I would say that I'm not necessarily a tech savvy guy, but I see it as a tool that I can use to improve some of these processes. So,
well, I like that approach because it's very easy to kind of stay in your own world and kind of go from year to year. This has worked in the past, so we might as well just keep doing it this year. But to be able to look at all of your process and say, okay, this isn't working, or this is working, but it can also be working better. That's a harder step to take. So that's a really nice approach that you're taking there.
Yeah, thanks. It's really tough, but I like to challenge myself, and I like to, I love tackling a project. I love tackling something that's really challenging, and think, man, yeah, how can we do this better? So,
so as we were getting into this, we were talking, about the early stages, I'll say, of AI, and it's data collection and then analysis. And I know there's so many tools out there for data collection. It's that next step that seems to be, I don't want to say a challenge, but I guess it is a challenge for the industry, is to take that data, but then be able to look at it, know what it's saying, and then make decisions based on that. Can you kind of talk about how you bring your perspective to that?
Sure. So, we're just getting into it, and really, it was funny. I've been getting into it personally in my role, and there was we do the manager meetings, every Thursday, and at one point I proposed it as an agenda item and said, hey, this whole AI thing, let me know if anybody's interested. We can talk about how to use some of these chat tools that are out there, and it was crickets. It was nobody was really interested, So I was like, okay, well, I'll take this on for a while, play around with it, and see what I can come up with, right?
Yeah.
So I've been kind of updating the group. I'm working a lot more with our IT group, which is great. At one point when we connected at Cultivate, kind of talked about, and on the panel discussion, I talked about, you know, having our own ERP system that's been developed in-house, you know, over the decades. And okay, well, that puts us in a really unique position because we're not relying on outside suppliers for an ERP system where then they have all the data. We have our own data, but then it's kind of a catch-22 because then if anything is going to happen with that data, it's kind of on us to do something about it, right?
Sure.
So with a outside ERP supplier, if they feel like they want to get into, you know, AI or some kind of AI layers in their ERP system, you're kind of at their mercy of what they want to apply AI to. And you know, we're just kind of, you know, we know what's out there. We know, you know, we know it's going to be the future, you know, sooner or later.
Right.
But then what does that look like? So, you know, from a greenhouse systems manager standpoint, that's my title. It's just kind of all of these bigger ideas and how things run. So I've been playing around with chatbots and what they can do, and you know, keeping up with some of the new updates. And you know, with some of these too, the ones that are promising, really just pay for the subscription. I was getting frustrated because like every day I was hitting my limit. And I was like, man, I was like right in the middle of this. I was really getting going. And it's like, oh, bam, I'm cut off at 2 p.m., you know, and I got to wait until tomorrow. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
shoot. So one that I like using right now is Claude 3.5 Sonnet. I actually like that one quite a bit. I'm a very visual person, and AI is very language based.
Sure.
So how do you bridge that gap? Well, the cool thing about, you know, Claude 3.5 is that once you get to the point where it can actually write code for you, and then in its artifact window, it can actually visualize that code.
Okay.
And that's really some pretty spectacular stuff, right? And again, this is not within WG at all. It's really just playing around with either a free version or a cheap basic version subscription.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool stuff. So part of my role again is, you know, we have this ERP system where I'm going through this documentation process. I kind of like to think like I'm the bridge between all of the processes that happen in the greenhouse and how they interact with that ERP system, and our IT guys that are in the background, you know, writing the code and running everything.
Right.
It's like, how do you link something as organic as a growing plant to code in the background to plan production, right?
Yeah.
And then how do we use these different reports and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I'm going through that process right now. And
Okay.
one thing that had been mentioned at, you know, Cultivate, and it's really getting this you know, tribal knowledge out of the heads of the people that have been working here for a while, and
Sure.
getting it into you know, an SOP, putting all those SOPs into one place, and then saying, okay, how can we do this better? So to give you an example of how these two things come together is I was talking with some inventory managers, and they have a process that they do, and each person does it a little differently. They manage their certain inventory a little differently, and
Yeah.
I asked them to each write an SOP. Okay, cool. Now I have something. So what I did was I uploaded those SOPs into Claude, and it said, okay, this is what's going on. These are two SOPs. This is what it's trying to do. Can you summarize these SOPs into one document, take out duplicate information, and then color code based on where it's coming from? So
Okay.
this guy, color it green, this guy, color it red. And if they both have the information, color it yellow.
Okay.
And it's called it's called zero shot prompt engineering, which is really cool. It's like if you get it the first time when you put your prompt in and it kicks out exactly what you want, is like it nailed it. So
Oh,
it gave
nice.
it gave me an SOP that's color coded. And then the cool thing was that I just copied it, sent it in an email to those two people and say, hey, can you I quote unquote combined your SOPs. Can you review this and send me your feedback?
Yeah.
So within a few, I would say it was about a 15 or 20-minute process to get some feedback from these guys. It would have taken me, 2 hours to go through these two documents and mesh them together myself, and then have a follow-up meeting. So it can happen pretty quickly. And then the other thing too is I didn't tell them that I ran it through a chatbot
Hmm.
or it was AI generated. I sent it back to them and they're like, oh yeah, just change these few words here and there, and then, switch these two sentences, and then you're done.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, I was pretty impressed with, they didn't call me out, like say, what did you just send me? Like, this is gibberish.
Well, I tell you that automation of the SOP process, I mean, that could has the potential to be revolutionary for this industry, because I mean,
Mhm.
it's so, if you can do it quickly, and SOPs seem to be something that it's very easy to put it on the back burner as you're working through your day to day. But, as you see in this industry, when you have, for example, an experienced person from your team leave, and then they take that knowledge with them, if you don't have that SOP in place, that's going to affect your future. But if you can automate it and turn it around very quickly, and to your point, push it out in a way that's understandable and accessible to your team, that's got to be invaluable, I would think.
Exactly. So that's kind of the process that we're going through right now.
Yeah.
Another similar example is, we had, okay, so our TTA machine, right? Our
Hmm.
TTA flex order, we had, kind of airing dirty laundry a little bit, but we had a collision error, right? So we had a error with the machine. We had to work through it, kind of troubleshoot it. So I said,
Sure.
okay, well, this is perfect for a collision error SOP. All right. So got the team together, sat them down in a room, and I didn't tell them this, but I in Word, you can actually transcribe a meeting. So
Hmm.
I hit record, and I told them afterwards that it was recording, but kind of prepped them, and I said, okay, we're going to talk through an SOP for this, for what happened.
Yeah.
Nothing had been existing before that. So I said, okay, these guys, what are you going to do? These guys, what are you going to do? And step by step, lay it out. And I said, all right, I'll throw an SOP together and then we'll review. And I stopped record, transcribed it over, uploaded that transcription to Claude. And I said, and I uploaded our blank template, our Walters Gardens SOP template.
Sure.
And I said, okay, here's a transcript from a meeting that I just had describing what the meeting was. And then please, put this into a standard SOP. And again, it was a zero shot prompt. It got it the first time,
Right.
which was amazing. So then I can again kind of dish out that SOP back to the team and say, hey, let's review this real quick. And I wasn't doing this when I started this whole SOP process. We really hit SOPs about 2 years ago, maybe.
Okay.
Kind of started hitting those pretty hard,
Yeah.
and using AI and a chatbot to assist in that process. I've only been doing the past couple of months. So,
Okay.
um,
All
but
right.
it's pretty incredible. And then to have those documented, and we use Microsoft Teams as our kind of our user platform,
Hmm.
and it's working out really well. So,
Okay.
mhm.
So as you implemented this, across the company, then how, and you kind of referred to this earlier in the discussion, how were you able to get buy-in both from, the team that's in the greenhouse every day, and then the management and ownership team at Walters Gardens? I mean, there's has to be investment on both sides for something like this to really work effectively. How did you go through that process?
That's a great question. I love that. I count myself really lucky to be in the position that I'm in. I work with amazing people every day in the greenhouse. I work with a really well-informed executive team that sees the future of their company,
Sure.
and really smart guys in IT. And to be, at the center of that is just really pretty fantastic. So it's really cool. I love working with the people in the greenhouse and really pitching it to them as, I'm I'm here to, see how we can make your job easier.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to is I'm finding the pain points in our ERP system and saying, what takes the most time for you to do?
Yeah.
What do you get stuck on every week? How can we make this better? And it's as simple as like adding a column of data in a user interface that you don't have to take the next step to look it up in a different place.
Right.
And it's like, man, that might save somebody half an hour or an hour every week in the process that they do. So that's really cool. And then the other thing too is like, the IT guys, like I talked about bridging that gap, the IT guys, they've been writing reports and writing coding and doing testing and fielding all of these, IT help emails. And we're really lucky that we have our own IT department. But they're really glad to have somebody on their team that can kind of step back from all the coding and all of the query writing
Yeah.
and say, this is kind of what's going on in the greenhouse. This is really what our employees need, and bridging that gap that way. It seems like they're pretty happy with kind of the progress that we're making on this ERP documentation process.
Sure. Sure. Well, and the fact that, if you can communicate to your team, this technology is not here to, take away any jobs here. It's here to make your job better and everybody else's jobs better as well. That was one of the things that really struck out to me in that panel discussion from Cultivate that you mentioned. I was in the room for that. One of the other things that really struck out at me to me was, the fact that there was a nice mix of growers who included on the panel, larger growers, smaller growers from different perspectives. What kind of advice, or would you say to somebody who's, who might be considering themselves to be a smaller operation, but this could still be beneficial to their long-term future? What are some of the steps or rules that they should follow?
Yeah, that's a great question too. I say just jump into it. I mean, there's nothing like just jumping into something. And I I have I have three monitors up on my desk, and I will have different things going on all at the same time. I'll have some kind of chat up. I'll have a YouTube video playing like on how to do this, and then I'll have like a browser and just like trying to work through it. And it's really kind of self-taught, right?
Yeah.
But just jump into it. And like I remember, uh, this is kind of a funny story. What was it about this time last year? Let's say October, November-ish. The use of AI chatbots were starting to go up, and at that time we were talking about our internship program.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make an internship program exciting? And I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna play around with this AI thing. I don't know what this thing is. So I said, hey, here's our internship program. Can you write a Shakespearean sonnet based on our internship information to make it appealing to college students? And
Yeah.
sure enough, it was it was hilarious. It was like spot on, and it was so funny. But it's like, what are you going to really do with that? Like it's pretty cool, but how are you going to use that in your day to day? And again, that was a year ago. That's kind of like
Right.
I kind of parallel it to this will date me a lot, but when the internet just came out, I can't believe I'm saying this, but when the internet just came out, there were like three websites, and they were all like just like dancing hamsters, right?
Yeah.
And just like this just random stuff that people were playing around with. And like at that time, nobody knew the potential power of the internet. They were just messing around, and that's
Right.
what AI was a year ago. And now AI can write code for you and generate all this amazing stuff.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Well, I like that too, because you think of AI and the tools that can work in the greenhouse to to make your team efficient and your plant production more efficient. you don't always necessarily connect it back to some of the more high level parts of the business, but something that you wouldn't think of, like setting up an intern program. I know that the team from Pivot Point Business Solutions wrote an article for us earlier this year that talked about the applicability of AI in human resources and how you can use it. It sounds like that's exactly what you're talking about here too. That's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting that you bring up HR, because you know, discussions about AI that I've had with other people, it's like where do we apply this? And and again, it's language based, right? So think in your company where you have the most language documented, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of it is in HR. It's a 100-page employee handbook. Well,
Yeah.
okay, slap a chatbot on it, and have a tool that employees can use to look up rules in their employee handbook.
Mm-hmm.
I think that example actually came up at some point at Cultivate. So that's not mine, but kind of getting back to your question as well about the smaller growers, like don't think you have to develop a tool, don't think you have to use data, but just start playing around, getting familiar with it. I've used the term prompt engineering, and that's really important for AI. My goal is to have a good enough prompt to have a zero-shot prompt,
Okay.
and get it in the first shot. And if not, it's maybe 2 or 3.
All right.
But when you play around with chatbots like this, you really understand how they interpret your language and what they do with it.
Okay.
So if you just kind of type a paragraph and like you're kind of little too wordy, and it will get lost a little bit, but if you really lay it out, it will follow quite nicely.
Okay. So as you guys look to next year as a company, then, so, what's the next step that you want to take this? And I guess I'll ask in a couple of different ways. What's the most immediate practical thing that you want to try and address with this? And then what would be your dream scenario for how, AI could really benefit what Walter's Gardens and the industry for a whole is doing in the future?
Sure. So another, conversation that companies need to have is let's put it this way: how many generations away is your data from being integrated into AI?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's say a generation away is you have your own data and you have a lot of it. Well, what do you do with it, right? Then it's integrating that into an AI layer at some point, and then using that AI tool.
Okay.
If you do a generation back, 2 generations removed from AI, it's, well, we don't have data, but we have a lot of knowledge. Or we don't have data, but we have a lot of 3-ring binders of sales records, right? Or we have a stack of paper in the corner that's gathering dust. Like, well,
Right.
that's maybe 2 or 3 generations removed. So like really think about your data and what value it holds for the company,
Okay.
and get it closer and closer to that AI integration point. You talked about in the next year, we are really heavily focusing on our ERP system, and doing that documentation process. We are, as I'm kind of doing my documentation role, the IT guys are updating from C++ programming language coding to C#, and then we're also doing a conversion from varchar to integer. So we're kind of cutting down the amount of data that we have just by converting some of those characters over into integers. So that's kind of technical stuff. And like I said, I'm not an IT guy, so I'm not going to get into it more than that. But so making our ERP system run smoother in the background.
Okay.
And then going from there. So, and again, AI is really focused on what tools are already out there and how can we use them in this documentation process, we're not looking anytime soon to integrating into our ERP system directly.
Right.
I think we're at that. We're right in between that. Yeah, we got to think about what generation we're in right now. So that question I posed to other growers, we're asking ourselves that same question. So
Okay. Well, and I like that thinking too, because it sounds like you can get to a point where you're collecting. You can collect too much data sometimes that could muck up the system if you're spending all that time on something that really isn't necessary. I'd imagine this kind of helps you through that process as well.
exactly, yeah, it validates what data is valuable and what data is not. The cost of AI, if one were to integrate an AI middleware
Yeah.
into an ERP system, it is based on tokens and is based on how much data you upload or how much data is processed with each prompt,
Okay.
right? So the more data you feed into the system, the more expensive it can be. And like in the grand scheme of things, it's fractions of pennies and
Right.
whatever else, but it can update pretty quickly. So if you
Okay.
think of a comparison is, okay, have an IT guy write a query to run a SQL report on a database that's living in the background. I
Mhm.
mean, that's a piece of cake, and that's dirt cheap. That can go pretty quick, and then you have a report that anybody can run. But every time you put in a prompt into an AI layer, you're actually paying a little bit of money, and
Mhm.
so it's you really got to do a cost benefit analysis on that as well.
Okay. Okay. Before we wrap up the conversation, I do want to talk about, coming up later on this year. You mentioned that you're going to be at the Great Lakes Expo in Grand Rapids in December, which, for anybody who's listening to this, if you haven't been to that show, I highly encourage you to go. It's a great show and it's a great destination as well. I know you're going to be involved in some of the talks there. Can you kind of run through some of the ideas that you'll be presenting to the audience there?
Sure. So let me back up one step.
Okay.
So at Walters Gardens, we do this thing called Perennial Plant Expo, where
Mm,
we invite our customers on site for a day or two, and we have presentations, we have tours. And I've been asked a few years in a row to do a presentation, and I did one on basically tech integration at Walters Gardens and what that looks like. So I'll be hitting on a few things, actually, quite a few things that we did not hit on in this podcast yet. Um, so one thing is, okay, um, a project that I worked on. It was about a year-long project. Basically, we have these work orders in the greenhouse,
okay.
and uh, how do you come up with a standard expected rate for work that's performed in the greenhouse?
Hmm.
Okay, I mean, um, different greenhouses have different work orders, and how do you either use your data or use your gut to come up with, well, I think the crew should be making this rate.
Yeah.
That's hard to do.
This episode of Greenhouse Grower to Grower is sponsored by Bartlett Instrument Company. Bartlett's Head Grower app allows growers to remotely control, monitor, and analyze their facilities from anywhere. You can adjust your settings, get notifications, and receive reports to your email using the platform. The Head Grower app is compatible with Bartlett's Climate Boss, Time Boss, and Weather Boss controllers. Go to bartinst.com to learn more.
So this expected rate thing, we're running into this thing where we're updating these expected rates in our ERP system, and the manager who was in charge of it just couldn't keep up, and it was just like, well, what's going on? There must be something happening here that she's spending a lot of time on this, and things aren't getting updated, and sure enough, I went to IT, ran a query, and said, how many expected rates do we have right now in our ERP system? And it was something like 40,000 expected rates, and that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Nobody can manage 40,000, and it was really easy to see how we got to that number. So if you pick up a WG catalog, we have about 1,000 varieties. okay, well, and then we have about 4 different sizes. So 1,000 times 4 is 4,000. And then if we have about 10 different types of work orders, that gets us easily up to 40,000 just
Mhm.
right there, right? And we are scratching our heads and saying, we got to do better than this. So instead of starting with the variety at the variety level, we actually flipped it and we said, okay,
Okay.
well, let's start at the work order level and then work down from there. So work order and then size, and then instead of doing variety, we did genus.
Mhm.
So we said based on the genus type, and we were able to get it down to about 1,000 expected rates. So
Okay.
1,000 is better than 40,000, a
Yeah.
little more manageable. But I was like, man, I think we can do better than this if we group the data in a certain way. Okay, Brian, I'm going to have you do something since I'm a visual learner.
Okay.
Take your finger and go up and draw a curve, and then bring it over, and then have it go up again. Okay, so
Okay.
we just drew kind of an S shape, right?
Yeah.
So what I had you draw is an inverse sigmoid curve. Okay, so it rises up sharply and then
Hmm.
goes over, plateaus a little bit, and then it takes off like a rocket.
Okay.
Okay, so if you imagine that, that's a data set, and that shows our expected rates of a certain size. Okay,
Hmm.
let's say a 72 count. Um, Now, those are all the variety points along that line, and you can see there's a low tail and a high tail. And what we said was, okay, we want to focus in that plateau area, right? And
Right.
it's a little slanted, and that's okay. But if we take that and say, okay, here's our expected rate, and then we have these little chunks that are going down the tail end or going up the high end, and then cutting off the outliers. So basically, it's okay if we look at this curve of data, and if we can group it, then we can get that number from about 1,000 expected rates all the way down to 240.
Hmm.
And then what we can do is this processing manager can actually run this data set and update it if we want to on a quarterly or even monthly basis, rather than going a full season and not being able to update everything
Yeah.
that she's touched. So that's again a really good example of how to think about data differently and boil it down into a user-friendly or a valuable data set that it actually can make a difference for your business on what you're doing. And how do you do that? And then also we combine that with we have this TV monitor that is over our production lines and our sorting lines, and it would color code the names based on whether they're making expected rate or not.
Okay.
And we were looking at that too and saying, boy, it's just like people are not looking at it, and how do we do that better? So we basically came up with a leaderboard style, and color coded them based on the expected rate, and it created a little bit of healthy competition on the line, which was really cool. And after a year of running this, we were able to increase our overall rates by 11%
Okay.
across the board,
Nice.
just by retooling how we handled our data and how we displayed that data back to our employees.
Okay.
So data is worth nothing if you don't do anything with it.
Hmm.
So I'll be talking about that. I'll be talking about AI a little bit and more like a general conversation, doing some QR code scanning and doing some polls within the presentation, just
Nice.
kind of get a barometer reading of where people are in the industry. So
Okay. All right. You also mentioned possibly looking at some LED lighting perspectives and then VPD integration as well. Is that going to be part of the discussion as well?
yeah, I'll see where LED goes. Working on some projects right now, and then also VPD integration. So with our big Cedar Break expansion project,
Hmm.
um, talked about VPD integration, basically vapor pressure deficit, and what that means in the greenhouse, and how you can use those environmental readings to automate irrigation booms.
Okay.
And there's certain companies that do that. There's certain companies that work well with, environmental controls companies and irrigation boom companies. And we put together Preva and Cherry Creek in this way. And it was a really fun project. I'll do a quick plug for the on-demand sessions for Cultivate. So I presented on our expansion project, and that is an on-demand session as well. So
okay, awesome.
I watched it. It was painful to watch yourself for 50 minutes.
Nobody likes to hear themselves or see themselves talk. That's for sure.
No, it was no good. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but
so last question for you. So as you look ahead, just from your perspective, what excites you the most about this industry that you're in? What's one thing happening in the future that you're really looking forward to?
I think it's we kind of touched on it a little bit. This whole generation flip that's going to happen in the next 10 years or so. I'm really curious about what that's going to look like industry wide. And when you pair that with adoption of new technologies, and I just, this idea of this tribal knowledge that's going to transfer from one generation to the next, and how we can work together to further the industry with some of that stuff is just incredible. I think it's going to be really powerful to see what we can do as an industry when that knowledge can be shared and can be grown upon. And man, that's just some really cool stuff.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.